So you'll notice that there's these basic strokes written by each letter to kind of break it down for you. So let's go through these, and again, you can use your tracing paper over these as you're going. But for the letter A, what it is it is an O form. So we would draw that first, and then we would draw our underturn. So we've got an O form, and we've got our underturn. The variation here, when we're doing a bounce script, can you see here on the A that it comes all the way to the baseline and all the way up to the waistline? When we're doing a bounce script, basically we're bouncing the letters above and below their different guidelines. So they could extend above a guideline, or above this one, they could extend below. So we're just varying where they're landing on the guidelines. So for the letter A, this is one way that you could do it with a bounce script, is we could just make a smaller O form, so it's a little smaller, and then we'd go into our underturn, and we could add a little bit of a sort of a flourish at the end, a little bit of a different curve. So something like this. So we're still doing that basic O form shape. We're still doing the basic underturn. We're just adding that little curve at the end. Okay, so this is just our regular monoline, and then this is the bounced version. So if you're not feeling comfortable with the bounce, I'd stick with this basic script, but it is fun to do the bounce. And the thing that's most fun about it is you just get to be creative. So for the letter B, we're doing something that's a reversed O form. So normally for our O form, we start here and work around. For a reverse O form, we're starting here and working around. So with that in mind, let's do our B. We've got an ascending loop here, so we've got a little entry stroke. So go halfway between these two for a little entry stroke and ascending loop and come down. Then we're going to do a reverse O form. So we're starting on this side, we work our way around this way, and then we kind of do a stylized upstroke. So a regular B with the basic strokes that we practiced would be like this, which is great. But this is just a little bit more stylized. So we're halfway between these two, and we go into our ascending loop. We do a reverse O form and a stylized upstroke. Now if we want to do the bounce version of this, we're just going to exaggerate some of these strokes. So we're still coming in with that ascending loop, but we're going to bring it above the ascending line. And then here, we're going to bring it below the descending line. So you can see we're just exaggerating those two strokes, but the basics of it are still there. So both of these are here as examples to trace, and tracing is great because it helps build muscle memory in your hand. So do some tracing, practice a few on your own. For the letter C, this is based on the O form, so it's going to start at the 2 o'clock position, and you're going to work your way up. And instead of connecting it, you'll kick the bottom out and to the right. Probably similar to how you already write a C, and we want it to end right at the waistline. From here, we can turn our page over, and there's not much variation on, if at all, on a bounced one. So what you could do, so this is the regular. We could just make it smaller. We could bring it up here. It's mostly just changing the position with the other letters. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get to connecting the letters, but it's the same basic shape with that one. Okay, for the letter D, we're going to again do that little entry stroke and ascending loop, and we're going to combine it with an underturn. So we're going to do that all in one motion, and then we're going to do an O form to make the D. So starting here with a little entry stroke to ascending loop to underturn and the O form. For this stylized bounce version, we can just create more drama by creating a larger ascending loop into an underturn, and you can see it comes lower and comes higher, and then we can just make a smaller O form so it doesn't quite touch this baseline. When I'm showing you the bounce, it's not necessarily rules, it's just showing you different places you could exaggerate or change the proportion of the strokes to get that bounce look. So next is the letter E. This one is going to be a small loop in the bottom up to the right. So this is based on the O form. So instead of starting at 2 o'clock, we've got our small loop, kick the bottom up to the right. For a bounce script E, we could just make the E smaller. We could also do something where we kind of curve this connecting point. And then from here, this page is done, so we're going to put it in our done pile, and we're going to grab our next sheet. So this one, we've got the letter F. This is the tallest letter in the alphabet. We're going to do a stylized upstroke, so instead of going this direction, our upstroke goes this direction. That's an easy way to just change up the look of the upstroke. So we've got an upstroke to an ascending loop, to a descending loop, and then we've got another upstroke. You'll notice lettering is not like cursive. We're not keeping our pen down the whole time. We do lift our pen between strokes. So for a stylized F, we could just do a much larger ascending loop and much smaller descending loop, and then an upstroke again. It could be the other way, where this one's really small and this one's really big. So either of these would be right. We're just trying to exaggerate some of those strokes off of this one to give it kind of a different look. Next is the letter G. This one is going to be an O form first, and then we've got a descending loop and an upstroke. So we want to lift our pen between each stroke. We're not keeping our pen down the whole time. For this one, this is the bounce script. I would just do a smaller O form. We could do a much larger descending loop with our upstroke. And something you'll notice, I've kind of curved this a little bit where this one is very straight, so that's something you could do too. Oops, I forgot my O form first. So that's the bounce script G. Next we've got the H. So this one is going to again have that little entry stroke with an ascending loop, and it'll come down to the baseline, and then we've got a compound curve. So ascending loop with a compound curve. A stylized version of that would just be a larger ascending loop, and instead of making the compound curve like end on the baseline, we can have this one not quite go up to the waistline and this one extend below. So that's a way to make it look like it bounced, is we're just not meeting that guideline or that one to create kind of a different look. From here we have to flip our paper over, and we're going to the letter I. So this one is just going to be an underturn, and then we dot the I. So this one's very easy. It's a basic stroke with a dot with it. For this stylized version, we could just make it a little smaller, and we can do that little curve into the next entry. For the letter J, this one's going to be a descending loop with an upstroke, and then dot the I, descending loop, upstroke, dot the I. For a stylized version, we can just really exaggerate that descending loop and then dot the I. So that's all this is, and I think once you get the basic strokes down, you kind of get an idea for these basic letter shapes. It's really fun to start playing with what you can exaggerate and change to get a totally different look of a letter. So for the letter K, this one is again going to have that little entry stroke and ascending loop, and then it will have a small reversed O form and then an underturn, but the underturn is really more of a diagonal. So we've got an ascending loop, a small O form, and an underturn. Then for our bounced version, we're just really going to exaggerate that ascending loop. We'll still do that small O form, and we can even bring this down below the baseline, or we can keep it more like the example where we keep it on the baseline. But it's just exaggerating that ascending loop and that underturn. From here we need our next paper, so we'll set that one to the side. We're going on to the letter L. So for this one, we've just got an ascending loop and an underturn, all one motion on this one. Kind of looks like a large E. So for the bounced version, we could just really exaggerate that ascending loop, kind of add a tail here. We could bring it higher, we could bring it lower. Either of those works great. Next is the letter M. This one is going to be a downstroke, an overturn, and a compound curve. Got a downstroke, overturn, compound curve. Next, this is the bounced version. So another way to do this M, you'll see we have this little entry stroke here. If we did an overturn and overturn and a compound curve, that's like what we're doing here. So we've got basically an overturn, but we're bringing it higher, a smaller overturn, and then a compound curve. So this one's fun because you can really play with which one you make big and which one you make small, but that will create that fun bounced look. Next is N. This one is going to be a downstroke and a compound curve. So downstroke, compound curve, or you could do an overturn and a compound curve. Both are correct. For this letter N, we'll do a large overturn and a small compound curve. And it's going to be smaller here and extend there. So it's something like this. So you can see if it's bouncing above and below the baseline. From here, we'll turn our paper over to the back. We've got the letter O next. So this one is going to be an O form with a comma dot. So we just draw our O form, and then about the 11 o'clock position, that's where you're drawing over to, that's where you're starting it to start the comma dot. So O form, comma dot. For this bounced version, we can do it like this and just keep drawing. So that's one way to do it. Or you can start here and do something like that. But the idea is that we just want to make a big loop here. And it could extend more down, it could extend more up, or it could just be bigger in general. P is going to be a long downstroke, a reverse O form, and a stylized upstroke. So downstroke, reverse O form, upstroke. The stylized version, we're just looking for what could we exaggerate here. So for this one, we're going to exaggerate that O form and upstroke. We could say we could make it tinier, like that. Both are totally fine with this bounce script style. You just want to look what stroke can I exaggerate or change so that it doesn't fall right within the guidelines. Next is the letter Q. This one is going to be an O form with a reverse descending loop. Normally our descending loops face this direction, but we're drawing it this direction. So O form, descending loop, upstroke. O form, descending loop, upstroke. A stylized version, we could do a smaller O form, we could do a larger descending loop, kind of a curved stylized upstroke. So little O form, big descending loop, stylized upstroke. And that page is done. I thought I had to flip it over, so set that one to the side. I just like keeping them all in order, so that's why I have you just set them to the side when you're done. So the letter R and S and X are called outlier letters, so they're not based on the basic strokes. So this one is going to have an upstroke with a small loop, and then it goes into an underturn. So upstroke with a small loop and goes into an underturn. So that's the letter R, and you'll notice it should come above the waistline. So for the stylized version, we could just do a larger loop or smaller loop. I think the larger looks more like the bounce style, but it's really just exaggerating it like that. So you're just trying to exaggerate 1 or 2 strokes within the letter. Next is the letter S. This one is going to be an upstroke, and this is the part that's unique. It comes down and around and up. So a cursive S is like this. So it's very similar. We're just creating a loop here. So upstroke that goes above the waistline and then loop around. And for the stylized version, for the bounce, we can really just exaggerate that bottom one a lot. We could exaggerate the top more. It's up to you how you want to do it. Just choose a portion of the letter and exaggerate it. Next is the letter T. This one's going to be a downstroke and an underturn, and then what's called a crossbar. So downstroke, underturn, crossbar. For this stylized one, we could extend it below the baseline. We can get really creative with how we cross the T. You know, you can just have fun with it. Next is the letter U. We're almost done, you guys. You're doing so awesome. We've got an underturn and an underturn. So just 2 underturns together. And this one, we can just make a smaller underturn and a larger. I like to do this type of thing with the U, the A, I'm trying to think, the D, so the D is the same thing, where I make a smaller in the a smaller O form or underturn, and then the larger following underturn. So U, so this one's going to be smaller and this one's bigger. Next is V. This one we're taking a compound curve and we're basically starting it here. So that's going to give us that V shape, and then there's a comma dot on it. And then a stylized version, we could just keep that whole part on, but just not bring that down to the baseline, and then a comma dot, and this part's going above. Next is W. We've got 2 underturns together and a comma dot. So underturn, underturn, comma dot. And then here, this could be, we could do a compound curve, underturn in comma dot to give that little entry stroke like we've got here. So it's a compound curve, underturn, comma dot. So you can really just have fun with exaggerating it and changing it up. That page is done. We're on our last page of lowercase letters, and then you guys will know all of the letters in the alphabet. So X is also an outlier letter. So if we take a compound curve, it's like we're cutting off the ends. So we would have that, and then we have an upstroke. So it's kind of curved. And we just want generally equal amounts of negative space on all sides of the X. So for this one, just to exaggerate it, we can just bring those above and below. We can really exaggerate that, almost like a crossbar. We could have just one go below. We could have this one go above. So you can see it doesn't matter where you're exaggerating, just choose a portion of the letter and exaggerate it and have it go above or below the guideline it's supposed to. Almost there. We've got 2 more letters. Next is Y. We've got an underturn a descending loop, and an upstroke. So underturn, descending loop, upstroke. For this one, I'll make a smaller underturn, an exaggerated descending loop, and an upstroke. So tiny underturn, exaggerated descending loop, and upstroke. Next is Z. This one we're really forcing it to fit into the basic stroke, so it's kind of like an overturn, but it's more curved, kind of like a descending loop, but more loopy, and an upstroke. So this one you may need to trace a little bit to get more familiar with, but that's the Z. This one we could just make it much smaller for that little portion and then do a really exaggerated descending loop and an upstroke. So something like that. So those are all of the lowercase letters. So please let me know if you have questions on any of the letters, you want to see them again or see more examples, and I'm happy to share that.